Welcome to a list of mountains that you, and almost everyone else, will never see in person. These are not famous peaks, and they are not part of any established climbing or trekking routes. Some of these mountains were mapped decades before anyone ever reached them on the ground, and others have still never been reached at all. One stands on the Arctic archipelago, where the Soviet Union detonated the most powerful nuclear weapon in history, and where access is still tightly controlled today. Number 4 contains an isolated rainforest discovered through satellite imagery in 2012. Scientists finally reached it in 2018, where they found species previously unknown to science. Number 5 was so isolated that no known Westerner had seen it from the ground for 85 years, and even its true height remained uncertain. And number 9 is a massive volcanic structure buried beneath Antarctic ice, known almost entirely from remote surveys and never seen from the ground by any human. But let's start with number 1. For our first mountain, we travel deep into Egypt's western desert, beyond the Nile, beyond the last oasis, and into a region where almost nothing breaks the horizon. Then, dark sandstone hill appears above the sand. This is Abu Ballas. The name means father of jars, and the reason becomes clear as soon as you reach its base. But reaching it is the real challenge. Abu Ballas sits deep in Egypt's western desert, more than 125 miles, or 200 kilometers, from the nearest oasis. There is no natural water source anywhere nearby, so even today, every drop needed for the journey must be carried in. In 1923, explorers documented more than 100 large pottery vessels here, many still arranged in deliberate rows. Every one of them had been transported into the desert. Some had once contained water, brought all the way from Dakhla Oasis. For decades, nobody understood why. Researchers eventually discovered that Abu Ballas was one station in a chain of around 30 archaeological sites extending almost 250 miles toward the Gilf Kabir Plateau. The route dates back roughly 4,200 years, when Egyptian expeditions crossed the Sahara using donkeys. Because the animals needed water at least once every 3 days, another caravan first had to travel ahead and leave supplies along the route. These isolated hills became ancient filling stations in a landscape where running out of water meant death. One reconstruction estimated that preparing the route may have required 225 donkeys carrying more than 13 tons of water, pottery, and equipment, but archaeologists still do not know where all this effort was leading. The known stations reach Gilf Kabir, but the trail may have continued much farther into Africa. We know how the Egyptians crossed this desert. We still do not know what they were trying so hard to reach. From Egypt's western desert, we now travel across the Indian Ocean to Papua New Guinea. Deep inside the Cerro range, one mountain remains so poorly documented that a modern expedition struggled to confirm its route, its name, and even its true summit. This is mountain number 2. Mount Kabangama lies in the remote central highlands of Papua New Guinea, inside the Kubor Range. Its summit rises a little over 13,400 feet, or 4,100 meters, placing it among the country's highest mountains. But for most of the modern era, Kabangama existed mainly as a name and a number on a map. It was recorded during a geological survey in 1975. The survey provided an approximate position and elevation, but almost nothing about the terrain surrounding it or how the mountain could be approached. For the next 4 decades, there was no recorded attempt to climb it. The nearest roads ended far below the mountain. Beyond the final village, the approach continued through steep rainforest on an old hunting route that gradually disappeared beneath mud, roots, and decades of vegetation. In 2018, a small expedition set out to complete the first recorded ascent. The uncertainty began before they had even entered the jungle. When the team showed their map to villagers, nobody recognized the name Kabangama. For several minutes, it appeared that the expedition had traveled to the wrong village entirely. The confusion was eventually traced to 2 villages with almost identical names and a map being examined upside down. Once the team began walking, progress became painfully slow. Local guides cut through the vegetation with machetes, while sections of the trail were barely wide enough for a single boot. It took several days before the climbers finally saw the mountain they had come to find. When they reached the ridge, their instruments recorded an elevation of 13,511 feet, or 4,118 meters, slightly higher than the old survey. But even then, the mystery was not completely resolved. A separate rock tower farther along the ridge appeared almost level with them and may have been a few meters higher. So after decades without a recorded ascent, the expedition reached Mount Kabangama. They still could not say with complete certainty that they had stood on its highest point. From the tropical highlands of Papua New Guinea, we now travel more than 6,000 miles north to the Russian Arctic. Here, the next mountain rises on Novaya Zemlya, an archipelago closed to most civilians and used for decades as one of the Soviet Union's largest nuclear testing grounds. This is mountain number 3. Mount Kruzenshtern rises 5,075 feet, or 1,547 meters, above Severny Island, and is the highest point anywhere on Novaya Zemlya. The mountain was mapped in 1822 by Russian explorer Fyodor Lico, who named it after Admiral Ivan Kruzenshtern, leader of the first Russian voyage around the world. But on later Soviet maps, the name disappeared. For decades, the summit was marked only as height 1,547. By then, Novaya Zemlya had become one of the most restricted places in the Arctic. In 1955, the Soviet Union began using the archipelago as a nuclear weapons testing ground. Over the next 35 years, approximately 130 nuclear tests were carried out here. The most famous came in 1961, when a bomber released the 50-megaton Tsar Bomba over Severny Island. It remains the most powerful nuclear weapon ever detonated. Mount Kruzenshtern was not the target, but it stood on the same island, inside a territory closed to ordinary civilians and almost completely inaccessible to foreign visitors. That isolation continued long after nuclear testing stopped. When a team finally organized a documented ascent in 2022, the operation looked less like a normal climbing expedition and more like a military deployment. A helicopter first surveyed the coastline, searched for landing zones, selected a base camp, and examined possible routes across the ice. Military aircraft and a naval tug supported the expedition. Satellite communications were established before the climb, and soldiers provided protection against polar bears. The team eventually reached the summit, raised 2 flags, and left behind a plaque and a time capsule. Mount Kruzenshtern had been visible on maps for 200 years, yet reaching it still required aircraft, naval support, military climbers, and access to one of Russia's most tightly controlled Arctic territories, and it happened just a couple of years ago. From one of the most tightly controlled islands in the Arctic, we now travel more than 8,000 miles south to Mozambique. There, a much smaller mountain remained isolated for a completely different reason. Its summit is sealed above vertical cliffs, with an entire rainforest hidden at the top. This is mountain number 4. Mount Lico rises from the forests of northern Mozambique, with steep rock walls surrounding a small rainforest at its summit. The mountain was known to nearby communities, but the forest above the cliffs remained almost completely cut off from the world below. In 2012, conservation scientist Julian Ballas noticed it while examining satellite imagery. From above, the summit appeared as a dark patch of intact rainforest surrounded by areas increasingly affected by farming and deforestation. Ballas immediately understood what the cliffs may have protected, an ecosystem that had developed with almost no modern human disturbance. But seeing it from space was much easier than reaching it. It took 6 years, 2 reconnaissance trips, and a team of 28 scientists, climbers, and local experts to organize the first modern scientific expedition. In May 2018, professional climbers installed ropes up a vertical section approximately 410 feet or 125 meters high. The scientists then hauled themselves, their equipment, and enough supplies to establish a temporary research camp inside the forest. They found frogs, reptiles, mammals, and insects isolated above the surrounding landscape. One butterfly collected during the expedition was later confirmed as a species previously unknown to science. It was named Lico, after the mountain itself, but the most surprising discovery had nothing to do with wildlife. Near the source of a stream, researchers found 3 old clay pots. Local communities knew of no one who had entered the summit forest, and the expedition had required modern climbing ropes to get there. Yet someone had reached it long before them. Nobody knows exactly who carried the pots up the cliffs when they arrived, or why they left them beside the water. Mount Lico spent years concealed in satellite images. And when scientists finally entered its forest, they discovered they were not the first people to find a way inside. From a rainforest hidden above the cliffs of Mozambique, we now travel more than 6,000 miles northeast to the high desert of western China. Here, one mountain remained unseen by any known Westerner for 85 years, while maps continued to exaggerate its height by hundreds of meters. This is mountain number 5. Ulugh Muztagh rises from the northern edge of the Tibetan Plateau, surrounded by hundreds of miles of high-altitude desert. Its name means Great Ice Mountain. For decades, maps listed its height as 25,338 feet, or 7,723 meters. That would have made it one of the highest unclimbed mountains on Earth, but almost nobody had been close enough to check. As far as public records show, no Westerner saw Ulugh Muztagh from the ground between 1900 and 1985. For 85 years, its accepted height came from a measurement taken by British explorer St. George Littledale during a journey across the region in 1895. In 1985, a joint Chinese-American expedition finally received permission to enter the area. Reaching the mountain required a 1,100-mile journey using 7 army trucks, 3 Land Rovers, and 2 Jeeps. The expedition had 3 goals: climb Ulugh Muztagh, determine its true elevation, and find out whether it might be a volcano. Then, shortly before departure, the team opened the container holding their satellite survey equipment. The antenna was missing. A jeep had to race across western China to catch the expedition before it disappeared into the roadless desert. The equipment eventually arrived, and on October 21st, 5 Chinese, Uyghur, and Kazakh climbers completed the first recorded ascent. But the survey produced the bigger surprise. Ulugh Muztagh measured 22,923 feet, or 6,987 meters. The old figure had been wrong by nearly 2,500 feet. A mountain remained unseen by outsiders for so long that the world added almost 3/4 of a kilometer to its height. Ulugh Muztagh had finally been climbed, and in the same expedition it became hundreds of meters shorter. From the empty high desert of western China, we now travel across the world to the Peruvian Amazon. There, a near-perfect cone rises alone above an ocean of rainforest, deep inside one of South America's most isolated, protected regions. This is mountain number 6. Cerro El Cono reaches only around 2,800 feet, or 850 meters, above sea level. But against the flat Amazonian forest surrounding it, the mountain looks completely out of place. Its slopes form an almost perfect cone, rising roughly 1,300 feet above the canopy with no similar peak immediately beside it. If you have watched this channel for a while, you have probably already heard about Cerro El Cono. I keep returning to it because, for me, it remains one of the most intriguing mountains on Earth. For years, its shape led to speculation that it might be a pyramid, an unusual rock formation, or the remains of an unknown volcano. Official geological records now identify El Cono as a volcanic formation created around 5 million years ago, long after the nearby Andes had already formed. It belongs to Sierra del Divisor, the only region in Peru where the Amazonian plain suddenly breaks into volcanic mountains. The national park surrounding it covers over 1.3 million hectares along the border with Brazil. Inside are isolated ridges, waterfalls, blackwater rivers, and species found nowhere else in the country. But the same geography that protected the region also makes El Cono extraordinarily difficult to approach. The park remains one of the largest intact sections of the Peruvian Amazon, and its official UNESCO submission specifically credits limited accessibility for keeping it that way. The wider protected area also contains the Iskanahwa Indigenous Reserve, established for people who continue to live in isolation. That means remoteness here is something authorities are actively trying to preserve. El Cono may be one of the most recognizable mountains in the Amazon, but for almost everyone, the only realistic view of it will remain from an aircraft, a satellite, or a photograph taken by someone permitted to enter one of Peru's most protected regions. From the protected rainforests of Peru, we now travel far into the South Atlantic. There, on an uninhabited volcanic island almost permanently hidden by cloud, satellites detected temperatures above 1,000 degrees inside a crater no expedition had ever reached, This is mountain number 7. Mount Michael is located on Saunders Island, part of the South Sandwich Islands in the southern Atlantic Ocean. The volcano rises to approximately 843 meters, or 2,766 feet, and dominates an island that has no permanent human population. The island was first charted in the early 19th century, but Mount Michael itself remained largely unexamined for decades. Visits to Saunders Island were extremely rare, limited to occasional naval or scientific voyages, and none approached the summit area in detail. For much of the late 20th century, Mount Michael was known primarily through indirect observation. Satellite data and thermal imagery indicated persistent volcanic activity near the summit, suggesting the presence of a lava lake. At the time, this was unusual, as only a small number of such features were known globally. In 2022, a scientific expedition reached the summit of Mount Michael for the first documented time. The team confirmed the existence of a persistent lava lake within the summit crater, verifying what had previously only been inferred from satellite observations. This made Mount Michael one of the few volcanoes on Earth known to contain such a feature. Even after this confirmation, Mount Michael remains largely unvisited. It stands as an example of a mountain whose defining features were known remotely, long before they were ever seen directly by humans. The next mountain is located even farther south, on another isolated island in the same chain. Unlike the previous volcano, this one remained quiet for most of recorded history, until activity was detected in a place where almost no one was watching. Mount Belinda is located on Montague Island, the largest island in the South Sandwich Archipelago in the southern Atlantic Ocean. The volcano rises to approximately 1,370 meters, or 4,495 feet, and occupies a large portion of the island's interior. For much of the 20th century, Mount Belinda was considered inactive. There were no confirmed historical eruptions, and the volcano attracted little scientific attention. That changed in the late 1990s, when satellite imagery revealed heat anomalies and surface changes consistent with volcanic activity beneath the island's ice cover. In 2001, satellite observations confirmed that Mount Belinda had entered an eruptive phase. Lava flows were detected beneath ice and snow, marking the first recorded eruption of the volcano. At the time, no scientists were present on the island, and the eruption was documented entirely through remote observations. Subsequent analysis showed that volcanic activity continued intermittently for several years. Ice-covered lava flows reshaped parts of the island's surface, but direct field studies were limited or absent due to the island's isolation and difficult access. There is no confirmed record of anyone reaching the summit of Mount Belinda during or after its eruptive period. Mount Belinda remains a rarely visited and poorly documented volcano, known primarily because it erupted in a place where almost no one was there to see it. The last mountain on this list is located in Antarctica. Far from any research station or established travel route, it is a volcanic structure buried beneath ice, where almost everything known about it comes from indirect measurements rather than human observation. Mount Takahe is a large shield volcano located in Marie Byrd Land, one of the most remote regions of Antarctica. The mountain rises to approximately 3,460 meters, or 11,350 feet, above sea level, and is completely surrounded by the West Antarctic ice sheet. The volcano was first identified during aerial surveys in the mid-20th century, when large volcanic features beneath the ice were mapped using radar and other geophysical techniques. Unlike coastal Antarctic mountains, Mount Takahe lies deep in the interior, hundreds of kilometers from the nearest permanent research presence. The volcano is largely covered by ice, and its surface features are poorly defined. Most information about its size, shape, and structure comes from radar imaging and satellite data, rather than detailed field mapping. Ground-level photographs of the mountain are extremely limited or non-existent in public records. Mount Takahe remains an example of a mountain known primarily through instruments rather than experience. Its existence is well established, but its physical presence has almost never intersected with human observation. All of the mountains in this video exist on the same planet we live on, which makes you wonder, how much of Earth is still beyond our direct experience if places like these can remain so isolated even today? Before you go, YouTube has recently been showing my videos to far fewer people than usual. Maybe it is connected to the World Cup, or maybe something else is happening behind the scenes. Either way, every like and comment counts more than ever right now. So if you enjoyed the video, I would really appreciate your support. Thanks for watching.